My name is Renee, and I am a Global Voices Metcalf intern at International House. The mission of International House is to enable students and scholars from around the world to live and learn together in a diverse community that builds lifelong qualities of leadership, respect, and friendship. Founded in 1932 by John D. Rockefeller Jr., International House of Chicago is today one of 20 members of the International House's worldwide network. In addition to supporting the graduate student community through our Graduate Commons program, International House also serves the greater Chicago community as a cultural and intellectual center for a wide array of programs. Close to 100 public programs are held each year at International House through the Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series, and in 2020, we created new globally focused programs and community outreach and engagement activities that continue to foster diversity of thought and experience virtually and through online gatherings. The Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series includes music and cultural performances, outreach programs with Chicago area international speakers, collaborations with foreign consulates, and forums and debates led by distinguished guest speakers, including our guests for today's program, who we are so pleased to co-host with the Seminary Co-op Bookstores. Naomi Shihab Nye is the Young People's Poet Laureate of the United States, and she recently received the Ivan Sandroff Lifetime Achievement Award for the National Books Critics Circle. Her most recent books are Everything Comes Next and Cast Away, both published in 2020. Naomi is here this evening to speak with Nandana Dev Sen about her translation of Acrobat, written by her mother, legendary Bengali poet Nabaneeta Dev Sen. Nandana Dev Sen is a writer, actor, and child rights activist. She's written 6 children's books and starred in 20 feature films across 4 continents. She has represented UNICEF and the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights to fight against child abuse and to end human trafficking. She is the winner of the Last Girl Champion Award, multiple Best Actress awards, and is also a child protection ambassador for Save the Children India. Her mother, Nabaneeta Dev Sen, remains one of the most beloved and versatile Bengali writers of all time and has over 100 books to her credit, including compilations of poems, novels, plays, stories, memoirs, academic essays, children's literature, political columns, and literary translations. Acrobat is a radiant collection of poetry about womanhood, intimacy, and the body politic that together evokes the arc of an ordinary life. Nabaneeta Dev Sen's rhythmic lines explore the joys and agonies of first love, childbirth, and decay with a restless, tactile imagination, both picking apart and celebrating the rituals that make us human. Nandana's translation of the book is available to purchase from Seminary Co-op Bookstores. Following the discussion, there will be an opportunity for questions, so please submit those via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now, please welcome Naomi Shihab Nye and Nandana Dev Sen.
Thank you so much, Renee. We are honored to be here, and I am so pleased to be speaking with Nandana tonight about her luminous project. What better project could there be to honor one's brilliant mother than taking the time, the care, the love to translate her words? I am so moved by her presence tonight, and thinking of her mother together as readers, as appreciators, is a great privilege. Nandana, I really am excited for us to hear your voice. I am simply a little go-between here with many thoughts and suggestions for our conversation tonight. But if you could just speak for a minute, I would like to rave before we start about the series that your mother's book is in. I have been a fan of Archipelago books for many years now. I really feel this is one of the great heroic presses of the world, bringing global voices into our reach, into our sphere, supporting translations that we would never have seen otherwise. And I just feel so happy for this gorgeous book that it appeared under the Archipelago imprint. Thanks to Jill Schoolman and Sarah Gale and Emma Raditz and everyone with Archipelago. But Nandana, please guide us tonight. You are so wonderful. Thank you for letting me be with you.
No, well, there's so much to say. First of all, I can't tell you how honored I am that you're with me, next to me, virtually, next to me on everybody's computer, and that you found the time to to experience this moment with me. I can't tell you how much that means to me, because you have for many years been such an inspiration to me through your poetry, through the love and the passion that you have for reaching out to younger audiences. I've been deeply moved and inspired by your work. So it's sort of a dream to be able to present the book to the world with you by my side. I couldn't be luckier. So thank you. And speaking about lucky, I could not be. I was telling Archipelago the other day, in fact, I have so many, I'm surrounded by their books because their books are so gorgeous. These are some of the new ones. These just arrived. And not only are they gorgeously produced, Jill, who is our visionary friend who founded this and is the publisher, they are, as you said, they've made this perfect small press, formidable small press, has made the bold decision to build bridges across cultures and languages and countries at a time when we feel the attack of fragmentation in such a kind of visceral way. And I think what they do, what Archipelago does, and the stellar team of Archipelago, because everybody on that team is a star, is so incredibly important. It's momentous. I mean, I'm so distraught, as I'm sure you are too, by the violence that has been happening today and the last few days in Palestine. And you can't keep thinking about the fact that you can't keep wondering about why and when is it going to be easier for us to learn to hear each other, listen to each other, to talk to each other. And I think the work that Archipelago does is that work, is that great and very important work. So yeah, I couldn't be more, I would not wish to be published by anyone else. I was telling just jokingly, only half jokingly the other day, that I wish every book of mine could be published by Archipelago. But of course, to make that happen, I would have to start getting very busy writing in other languages, including Bengali. You know, I'm not sure that I'll be able to fulfill that dream of mine, but wouldn't that be lovely? They are the dream team. So yes.
Well, their books are treasures, not only to read, but even to touch. There is something so tactily pleasurable and palpable about the ways the books feel, the size of the pages. And thank you, Nandana. You are a person committed to children and children's rights and human rights. Thank you for mentioning what's happening in Palestine and Gaza as we speak. It is a terrifying time. And I have been feeling equally traumatized for the children in Bengal, in India, who are in jeopardy because of the spread of the virus there. You know, when you hear the devotions of International House, Chicago, for example, University of Chicago, leadership, respect, friendship. And then you think about, well, I realize those couldn't have held the virus off, although better leadership in all of our countries might have helped. But when you think about respect and friendship and how we have such high ideals in our different labors on earth, and then what happens to them and how they become sabotaged and eclipsed just because there are so many weapons and because violence gets out of control and people don't respect one another. Well, it means a great deal to me on such a traumatic night to be speaking about such a humane, thoughtful, sensitive person as your mother, and then yourself bringing her words before us. So could you just tell us where this beautiful project began for you?
Yes, I would love to tell you that. You know, it began actually decades ago when I was in college, and my mother and I always had a very strong connection through poetry. I'll talk about it later maybe, but in this case, what happened was she had come to visit me when I was a freshman at Harvard, and she was asked to give a poetry reading at the Bunting Institute. She had come on a lecture tour because she was also a very distinguished academic. And so she'd come to give a paper on comparative literature, actually, a paper on the epics, on women's epics. Anyway, so we realized that she didn't actually have poems that were in English that she could read out. So we got busy translating her poems. And that's how actually this project, in truth, it started that long ago when we started translating poems together. And I started translating more and more of her poems. And it was always born out of need, rather because she needed to have translations of her poetry with her. She was perfectly able to translate them herself. She wrote beautifully in English. When she lived in England, she wrote poems in English, and several of those poems are in fact included in Acrobat. But she didn't enjoy translating her own work. In her mind, her job, her work on the poem was done, and she would rather write another poem than translate it herself. That's the way she felt. At the same time, she felt very strongly about writing in her mother tongue. It was a political choice for her. She made she didn't pretend it was anything other than that. And she was a kind of a language activist and was very concerned about the future of our regional languages and literatures in India, and worked very hard to preserve them. And this was her huge contribution to that. In fact, she even wrote about how in some ways it was easier for her to write in English than in some ways English allowed her to be free in a way the mother tongue did not, because the mother tongue had a certain moral censorship that she felt, which she didn't feel in English, but the father tongue. But anyway, so that's how it started. And this particular book happened because a wonderful translator called Tess Lewis introduced me. She had come to a reading, a session I'd done on translating my mother's poetry in Jaipur Lit Fest. Have you ever been to the Jaipur Lit Fest?
I have not, but one of my best friends has gone many times, and she tells me how wonderful it is.
We need to, you would so love it.
I've been to India
they
so
would
many
love
times,
you,
but
even more
never to the
importantly.
fest.
We need to bring you there. So we met at this small translation talk that I was giving, and she introduced me to Jill. Jill really loved my mother's work, and then heroically moved heaven and earth to make sure, because my mother was already very ill by that time, made sure that Ma saw this this beautiful cover. So my mother and I chose this image by Rabindranath Tagore, who is one of our favorite poets, and I know one of your favorite poets as well.
Since childhood, yes. So it's incredible that we all share this love.
Yes.
And the painting is so perfect for the book.
Isn't it?
Yes.
I just love it. And my daughter, who's 7 years old, has already decided that this is a likeness of us. And she said, it's okay that you can't see my face because my head is turned. So in her mind, this is almost a photograph of the two of us. And of course, in my mind, I see it as a representation of me and my mother. So yeah, I think it is beautiful.
What an exquisite project. Would you read us 2 poems to kick us off?
I'd love to. Which ones would you like?
I would love to hear Change and Alphabets.
Okay, great. Let me start with the alphabets. Okay. When night falls, I search for him. I bring him home. I look him in the eye, and I cage language. When day breaks, once again the world wraps around my eyes, and off he flies, taking each word, that alphabet bird.
Magical poem.
I love that. I'm tempted to read that in Bengali also for you to hear it. Should I do that?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be lovely.
Thank you. It just has such a music to it.
Yes.
অক্ষর প্রতিদিন রাত্রি নেমে এলে আমি তাকে খুঁজে আনি, আমি তার চোখে চোখ রাখি, সকাল হলেই ফের দুই চোখে সংসার জড়ায়, উড়ে যায় অক্ষরের পাখি.
So lovely.
Thank you. I really love that too. And she, when I translated this poem, I did another book of hers. This is the book that actually got introduced, that got to Jill, that made her want to make a bigger book. And in this book I made as a birthday surprise for my mother when she turned 75. So I was doing all the translations on the sly. I wasn't telling her about them. And when I did this one, it's a beautiful poem in Bengali and quite short. And in most of the cases, I've tried to keep not just the rhyme and rhythm, not just the metrical structure, but also the structure on the page as much as close, so that it moves you the same way as, as a being, as an entity on the page. So this one was hard to do that. And so I took a couple of liberties. And there was also there was a sense of it, which if you translated it too literally, was difficult to capture in its entirety. So I added the lines and I caged language, which is actually unsaid in the, it's implied but unsaid in the original. And she loved it. She absolutely, which was great, because I always, I thought if she hadn't been alive, I probably wouldn't have made that. I wouldn't have been bold enough to do that, because I wouldn't have known whether or not that would have been her choice. Anyway, so yes, I love that poem too. I will read to you. You wanted me to read
Change.
Change, yes. Change. Yes. Everyone changes little by little, never completely, not all the way, but only a little, just enough to transform summer, monsoon, winter, night and day.
There is such a sense of pithy wisdom and magic in her lines. I love what she leaves unspoken.
Yes.
The fact that there are never too many words, never too many images, so precise, so crystalline in her way of writing. And when I was reading the comments on this book, Acrobat, I was so moved by even the comments. Many times you'll read comments and you'll think, oh, that's nice. That's a very flattering comment. But in this case, the comments were so intriguing. People saying things like quirky yet profound, stay awake in every line. And Forrest Gander says that was your mother's own prescription, stay awake in every line. And maybe that's why the lines feel so clear, so clean. Walking the tightrope, the quiet high wire act. I mean, all of the images that are applied to her poems are so appealing and intriguing. You must feel very gratified that so many wonderful people love her voice.
I feel so grateful, and I wish she could have seen them. She would have loved it. She felt very close to the poetic community. She felt very close. She was a very open person who, she wasn't really reclusive. She loved community. And I think she would have been so happy to see the way that that not one community, but various communities coming from the same place of love of poetry have responded to her voice. And she was very keen. I mean, it was quite incredibly, even though she had all those books, as Renee mentioned, and she wrote in every genre, as she mentioned, and she was prolific and really popular in every genre. This is the first book that was has been published and is being distributed to an international audience. So she was very excited about that as well, even though she knew that she had made the choice of writing in Bengali, which made it harder to reach an international audience. But still, there was a part of her that felt a little disconnected felt that she wasn't able to share her work with the global audience. So she was very excited about this book coming out, and she would have loved all the comments that her poetry has inspired. Yeah.
And in people from so many backgrounds. So
right.
Really, this is a book that makes an important bridge and keeps her presence vivid and alive in so many new minds meeting her for the first time. Could you speak a little bit about, when we spoke before, about the grief after a loved one dies, and how the presence of voice, which remains with us, often in memory, but in this lucky case, on the page, on so many pages, how that has been a comfort to you? Because I think so many people have lived with that sense of loss this year.
Yes,
in the world.
it's true. And I think it has been, it was at both heartbreaking, because it happened, I was doing the book right after she died, and I was expecting to do it with her. So I didn't really have time to have grieved and taken this on. This was my grieving process.
Yes.
Doing the book was my way to cope with the loss. And so what was hard about it was that I missed her with every poem, and I could hear her voice, as you said. And some of it from memory, because there were several poems that I'd heard her read out in poetry. You know, Kolkata is full of poetry meets. We love them more than rock concerts, more than, you know, plays. That is the performance that people in Calcutta love the most. So I grew up going to them with her, and I could hear her reading many of these poems. But also there were poems I had never heard her read them, but when I did now it all came to me. And strangely and beautifully, some of them made me understand her a lot better than I had before. Even though I had known these poems always, I had been surrounded by them, I love them, but I had kind of taken them a bit for granted, I think, in the way you do when you really love something so much that you assume that you know everything about it and you understand it. But so I understood, you know, she had we grew up in an all-female family with my grandmother, who was also a poet, a formidable poet, a feminist. She was a child widow who remarried scandalously and then established herself as a best-selling poet. She actually, you know, had big royalties from her poetry, which, as we know, can be quite a challenge. Anyway, so there was my grandmother, my mother, my older sister, who became a journalist, and me. So we grew up in this all-female family, feeling quite intrepid. And she made us, one of the things that I was puzzled by was the fact that she and my grandmother were incredibly close, and yet it was a complicated relationship. They were, and so there was a lot of complexity. Sometimes there was, you know, a degree of strife, but her poetry made me understand that. So that had been one of the mysteries to me growing up. Why do these two people who love each other so much and contribute to each other's work so much? My grandmother was my mother's, you know, strongest critic and most loyal reader and most scrupulous editor. And the same with my mother too. As long as my grandmother wrote, my mother played that role as well. So they were intensely close, personally, professionally, and yet there was a lot of there was hurt. And I think I understood it just a lot more when I was looking at the poetry in a different time in my life, and when I was, you know, I was discovering new contours of pain that I hadn't actually experienced before. And I think in that context, there was clarity that I had not had before. And the same for my mother, for the separation between my parents, which actually informed a lot of her poetry. I mean, they're not about the separation, but they affected the emotionality of those poems and what she was thinking of and what she wanted to write about, and the way she wanted to write about it, because she was always extremely open. She bared her soul in her poetry to a point that was quite staggering. she revealed herself to a degree, a kind of degree of nakedness that one would not see in Bengali poetry, Bengali women's poetry, emotionally. So she was emotionally naked in a way that was just stunning. So I understood that as well better. And somehow, and then the challenges and anxiety of motherhood, now that I'm a mother, that I don't think I ever understood those poems so well either. I thought, oh, it's so nice that my mother's written a poem about me and my sister and etc. But a lot of them are quite dark poems that, the darkness is not about us, but it's about the responsibility of motherhood, right? So there was so much I did feel like I understood her in a much whole, in a much more total way through her poetry when she was gone, in a way that I hadn't, even though we were incredibly close.
What a gift that is, Nandana. And what an astonishing 3-generation linkage you have there in your family, of 3 generations of writers and creative people working together, contributing to one another's work. And I think of what the Scottish poet Alistair Reid said at the end of one of his poems when his father was dying. He said, "Now begins the conversation going on and on and on."
No.
And I feel that in these poems, that there is a conversation that is struck up in anyone who reads them, perhaps for the first time. Maybe we've never had the privilege of having a conversation with your mother before, but the poems invite us to. But for you, they would carry on this long conversation you've been having. What a beautiful, beautiful gift that is. Could you grace us with 2 more poems, perhaps Heartbeat on
Yes.
33, and I just love Sparrow Again on
Okay,
74.
I love writing both those two.
I love all the poems, frankly. Picking out poems for you to read was a delight.
I will read these 2 poems, but then I will make a cheeky request of you too. I'm warning you.
I'm ready for it.
Okay.
You can do anything.
All right, great. Heartbeat. Heartbeat. The meaning of the word heartbeat changed for her suddenly that day. Just as the tiny bluebell bursts through deep snow for the first time, all alone, so brave. Just as the sliver of light falls on one side of the face, glowing like a fond memory. Words are flighty, like fortune's goddess. They flit from home to home, changing their character and their heart. The face of the word heartbeat suddenly hardened, like a cunning moneylender appearing at the door, clutching the deed of debts accrued since birth. And so, signing the bond for her lifetime, this free woman became a slave to one word, heartbeat. Sparrow. There it is. Sparrow again. Don't ask me again to be a fairy. I cannot be a fairy anymore at any hour. Moonlight is frightening, loneliness an unbearable weight. Listen, please. There's no moonshine left in my heart. My mind is tightly bound in sunlight. Let me be a sparrow. You know, the way my mother wrote poetry, she had to write some poetry every day. If there was a day in which she didn't write one line of poetry, it didn't have to be a complete poem, but if she did not write one line of poetry, and she's written about it at many times and spoken about it because she felt so strongly about it, then to her that was a wasted day. And even though she was so popular in every genre, she saw herself primarily as a poet. She would always call herself, her writer's identity for herself was located in her poetry. And she would write and rewrite and write again her poems to the point, and she had a great sense of humor. So her prose was very self-deprecating, very different from her poetry. It was very self-deprecating. It was quite irreverent, and she made brutal fun of herself. And she wrote that she would drive her publishers to tears, and they would eventually have to kind of snatch the manuscript away from her hands because she kept making changes to the proofs of one word here and one word there. So I would love you to read this poem, which I love, I've always loved, which reminds me so much about the way my mother worked. But I think you found a secret about this process, which I'm not sure that that ever really revealed itself to my mother. If you could read, "How do I know when a poem is finished?"
Thank you so much for inviting me to. I'm honored. When you quietly close the door to a room, the room is not finished. It is resting temporarily, glad to be without you for a while. Now it has time to gather its balls of gray dust, to pitch them from corner to corner. Now it seeps back into itself, unruffled and proud. Outlines grow firmer. When you return, you might move the stack of books, freshen the water for the roses. I think you could keep doing this forever. But the blue chair looks best with the red pillow.
Mm.
So you might as well leave it that way. I'm so touched that you would ask me to read that. And I would say it's a very common question people ask. Students ask, how do you know when a poem is finished? And I was just reading an essay this morning by a writer whose work I don't know at all, but I liked what he said in the essay. He said he believed in writing first drafts as fast as you could, because writing was harder, but rewriting was easier. So write the first draft very fast and then come back and you have a more relaxing time rewriting because you have something on the page. But the way he put it was very funny. And I think for many people, that conundrum of when may I leave the poem? How do I leave the poem? How do I not explain the poem? Really bothers them. So I did feel that coming up with that image of just leaving the room and leaving the poem in its place as it is when you leave the room, it was helpful to me. So it touches me so much that you think of your mother. I'll always think of that as her poem now.
Well, it reminded me so much of her. And also the image, as you said, it's so brilliant because a poem is a place. You live in a poem. You construct it, you decorate it, you furnish it, you make it,
well,
you create
stanza
comfort for you.
Yes, stanza, room,
right?
Like a room, yes.
And so it's sort of a refuge, and it's kind of brilliant because it's so simple, but it's perfect. I don't think there is a more perfect metaphor for making a poem, finishing a poem. So I'm really glad that you read that.
Thank you so much for asking me to. And may I ask you also to read two more?
Okay.
A Story of a Dry Leaf on
Okay.
63, which I just love.
Yeah.
And Catch of the Day.
I really love
it. 123. I mean, it's so marvelous to hold a book and just want to share so many poems in it with people you love, with friends, with young writers. That's how this book feels to me. Acrobat. We need to hold it up again. I hope so many people will be getting this book and sharing it with people they love. But excuse me, please read those when you have them.
Story of a Dry Leaf. The other day on the road, you had brushed away a bit of dry leaf from my hair. Now I am buried in a heap of dry leaves, invisible. Where did you go?
Oh. That poem strikes me, it's like a Zen koan. It's a beautiful, exquisite poem. Thank you.
I really love that poem too. And it was Catch of the Day. Right?
Catch of the Day, 123.
Yes. That is here somewhere else. Oh, right. I might read this one in Bangla too. Is it?
Oh, yes.
Or shall I do that? Okay. Jiol. মনে হয় টুকরো করে ফেলি কুটনোর মতন কুটি বাটনার মতন বাটি মেখে জুখে উনুনে চড়াই হেরে গেছে রোদ বৃষ্টি মাটি এখনো ভেতরটা কাঁচা কই মাছের মতন লাফায় জিয়ল যৌবন Catch of the day. I want to chop it up, slice it into pieces, grind it into a paste, season it, then shut it in the oven. They didn't win the sun, the rain, the earth. It's still all raw inside, floundering like a catfish, still alive, freshly caught. My youth.
Oh, those last words, my youth. Would you just read that one more time? I think we need that one more time.
The whole poem?
Yes, I just love hearing it in your voice.
Thank you. And you know what? This is so much about the spirit of my mother. So if there was one poem that is absolutely about her, this is it. So thank you for giving me a chance to read it again. I want to chop it up, slice it into pieces, grind it into a paste, season it, then shut it in the oven. They didn't win the sun, the rain, the earth. It's still all raw inside, floundering like a catfish, still alive, freshly caught. My youth.
Oh, such a brilliant poet's impulse. My youth. Boom. I think hearing you read these poems, Nandana, is also its own ecstasy. You know, reading them on the page is a great pleasure, but hearing the translator, who happens to be the beloved daughter, reading the poems, and happens also to be a great presenter and actor yourself, to hear them in your voice is such a marvelous, marvelous gift. I want to invite anyone who's with us who would like to ask you a question to put it in the Q&A box, and I'll try to catch it here like a flounder myself and pass it on to you. Could you speak a little bit about your mother's practices as a writer? Now, it's very rare to have more than 100 books. To have them in multiple genres is very rare. So many multiple genres. So how did she manage this? And maybe your own practices as a writer.
So she, you know, she started off, she's basically wrote like you, she started writing, she wrote her first poem at 6, and like you, she published her first poem at 7 in a children's magazine, and she published her first grown-up book of poems before she was grown up, but before she was 21. And she kept writing. She had a notebook with her everywhere. I mean, not the same one. I mean, obviously she had various notebooks over the years, but she always had a notebook with her. And even when she was ill, the notebook was under her pillow. So if she woke up in the middle of the night and wanted to write, it was there. So she wrote, she had a visceral need to write poetry, and she used it she wrote extensively about how poetry was central to a woman's freedom, and she felt quite strongly about it, and she wrote about it in the context not only of urban poetry, written, that urban written poetry. She also spoke about it in the context of rural oral poetry and the work songs and the songs from our epics, which women poets who are in the villages orally revise and rewrite, right? So she did a lot of work in that. And she felt very strongly that for a woman, poetry was, in Audre Lorde's words, not a luxury. She really felt that with every fiber of her being. So she wrote and wrote and wrote. She was depressed when she was not writing. I haven't experienced her having writer's block many times in my life, because she just had so many, her head and heart were so full of ideas to write about. But when she found it hard to write, she found it the most depressing thing. She also had a very strong sense of social justice, which she brought into her poetry, into her prose. She, as I mentioned earlier, she was one thing that was, in terms of her practice, I think, she liked to get up and start writing, and then she would keep writing. When it was bedtime, the writing would just continue in bed. She would lie down, face down, stretched out on the bed with her notebook open and writing it like that. And but she also composed on the computer a lot, and she wrote in Bengali typescript in her computer, and she lost the vision in one of her eyes in the later years. She had a macular hole in one eye, so she had no vision in that. So she really struggled, and it was sort of a heartbreaking image for me to see how difficult it was for her to do that, and really squinting her eyes and coming close and trying to find the right, but she wouldn't do it any other way. She didn't want to dictate it. She dictated her last few columns. She had this column which was enormously popular that she did every Sunday, that people around the world would wait for, the Bengali population around the world would wait for. She kept doing it, and in the last few weeks she dictated it to us. She wasn't able to do it, but she still did it. I think even maybe 10 days before she died, she wrote her last, and she wrote about Acrobat in that. In fact, in that last column, she wrote about how excited she was about this book finally coming out.
That's wonderful. And what a devotion, what a passion that carried her for all those years doing this work.
Yes.
And so admirable that through illness, through diminishment of one's abilities, physical abilities, she did not flag. She didn't say, okay, I quit, I'm out. She kept doing it. We have a question, Nandana, an interesting question. You mentioned the difference in rhythms between the two languages, and that you even added some lines to your translations when the direct translation wasn't quite right. Can you speak more on the challenges you faced while on this journey?
That is an excellent question. Who is the
it is anonymous. We do not have a
all
name
right.
on the question.
Well, I mean, with my mother's poetry, poetry is always a challenge to translate, right? So, but with her, the particular challenges were, there were many different kinds of challenges. The first thing was that she loved to write in rhymes. And she used rhymes. She was masterful in using rhymes, and she used rhymes to underscore, not just for emphasis, but also to create revelations and surprises. And so they were, or even sometimes to express dissent, because you have as a rhyme not what you expected, and suddenly that's the moment when you realize what the poem is actually about. So she used rhymes in a way that was central to the meaning of her poetry. Not all of it. I mean, I'm not saying that all of her poetry, in fact, most of her poetry was not in rhyme, but the ones that were in rhyme, I did not wish to translate them without the rhyme. So I made a kind of commitment to myself that every poem that was written in rhyme would be rendered in rhyme in Acrobat. And that took a long time. It was fun. I love rhymes too. And I'm not as brilliant in them as my mother was. So it took longer than it took her, I'm sure, but I'm glad that I did it that way. I also tried to keep the metrical structure, so the way it scans and the rhythm of it the same, which also I managed in most of the cases. The way it looks on the page, the stanza divisions, that was a little bit harder because, as you mentioned in the question, the languages are structurally so different that something that needs, you can express a thought in Bengali in 2-3 words, as you were saying, Naomi. Ma was also particularly good at choosing those 2 or 3 words that would actually bring you a universe. But in English, it sort of becomes, it just stretches out. So that was a little bit harder, but in that I wanted to be as true to it as I could, but it wasn't always exactly the same look on the page, but for a lot of them it was. Then there were things like the fact that she would make up words, so which you can do actually in Bengali and Sanskrit based words more easily, because you can join 2 words and you have a new word and it makes perfect sense. Now we don't join words in English, and certainly not with that kind of grace and efficacy. So that was harder. And sometimes she also used words that had multiple meanings. So the choice was to either find something else that would have multiple meanings or to make a choice. Sometimes there were, the other thing that I really did not want to do, because I don't like having footnotes in poetry, was not to actually explain any of the cultural, historical, political stuff. So then the challenge became to find equivalents that would at least give you the sense of that would be emotionally true to it, and also would give it enough information that the poet could then look it up on Google and find out, if not the poet, the reader could, if they wanted to, rather than having a footnote explaining, I don't enjoy reading poetry like that, so I didn't want to do that. So I guess those are some of the challenges, but they were beautiful. I mean, I felt like it made me think about her choices really hard, and it made me feel closer to her in terms of her craft. I mean, poetry made me feel closer to her emotionally in a different way, but these challenges made me feel closer to her art and to understanding it.
That's so beautiful. We have a comment and a question from Ankush Nashin. The comment is, I love the way you say ma. And I have to agree with that. I love that the way you say it as well. And your letter to Ma, which ends the book, is so beautiful that it made me want to read an entire autobiography or memoir written by you. I would love to read that. Please inform me when that is published. And the question is, what is your most favorite poem in this book, if you have one?
Oh, goodness. My most favorite poem, I don't know if there is one poem that I love the most, but there's a poem that she wrote about the fact that we are constantly battling with different selves within ourselves. That's a poem called Make Up Your Mind, and that you can read as her poet self versus her novelist self, or her mother self versus her daughter self, or her, any number of ways. That's a poem I really like. Then there's a poem called Those Beloved Faces, which I really am moved by, which has to do with the difficulty of coming to terms with seeing your loved ones grow old and unwell, and understand and be so reminded of the shortness of time that we have together. So that is another one I like. I don't know, I have too many.
Well, it makes sense that you would have all of them be your favorites, but maybe if you think Make Up Your Mind would be a good ending poem in a moment. I had a poem of hers that I wanted to read toward the end, and maybe you could read Make Up Your Mind after it, if you like, because definitely we have to end with your voice, her voice. But we have another question, also from Anonymous. It says, the emotional nakedness, as you put it, of your mother's work seems to take up new meaning when we're thinking about the expansion of audience that came from your translations. How did you approach that problem of audience? Did it always feel revolutionary? Was it ever scary? Or did you find yourself resisting the process?
You know, it's a very good question. I hope I'm understanding it correctly. Are you asking whether there was a sense in which I felt I needed to pay attention to questions of loyalty in this? Because when you do translate, there is always the possibility of of compromising the fidelity, right? I don't know if that is the question. Do you think that is the question, Naomi? Or
well, it's a fascinating question. I mean, I keep rereading it, and the line, was it ever scary? That idea that you're introducing emotional nakedness of your mother's work to a larger audience, and maybe some of them wouldn't have the background with her work, perhaps,
right,
through your translations.
right. Well, it wasn't. I mean, I knew that it was a challenge. It wasn't. I just have so much faith in her poetry that I felt. It's not that I didn't feel that it wouldn't be shocking. I think a lot of her poetry can be shocking, but in a good way. And I was very excited by the fact that another side of her personality was going to come out, because internationally, I mean, she's known as a very creative and extraordinary academic. She was renowned, and she was also, a lot of her prose had been translated, which were very self-deprecatory and fun, but different. And this was, so she was not afraid to laugh at herself in her prose, and she was very prone to crying in her poetry. So that was a significant difference. And I did think that this would open up another side of her writer's persona to the world in a way that it hasn't actually been shown before. I think, I mean, and I don't think this is the question that you're asking, but it just made me think of the fact that there was a part of me that found, and I didn't understand it at that time, but I kept on working on the poems more and more and more, kind of not leaving the room to find the room that you talk about in your poem, Naomi, not leaving the room with the time and the space to find its outlines, to strengthen its outlines. And part of it was because I think I was afraid. So this is not, I was scared of this very personal relationship that I had with this poetry become public. I don't know how else to say it. I don't know if it makes any sense, but it was more that I think I was guarding that relationship quite jealously, and as I was grieving, and I didn't want to let it go. So that there was a bit of that too. It was not scary, but there was something. I don't know what that word is.
Right. That is a beautiful answer. It's a difficult concept, the question, but a very important one. And I think the power of the exhilaration of being able to share her voice may have taken over the sense of guarding.
Exactly. I think it did. Absolutely.
Yeah. But that seems like a very beautiful thing. You know, I wish we were on a long train or boat ride together, and we could continue talking for 3 days about your mother,
I would love that.
life. I would love that. A train across India would be just fine.
Or a houseboat in Kerala.
Yeah, a houseboat in Kerala. That would be beautiful. But I'm so grateful to be with you tonight, Nandana. It feels like such a closeness and a pleasure around this beautiful book, Acrobat, which you have put your love in, a real labor of love. You know, I wish more people had an opportunity to do something like this with the voice of their beloved parent. But this is rare. This book is a rare gift, and I hope it finds so many friends of all ages. I really think this is a powerful book for teenagers to read as well, since that's a population I work with a lot. I
Yes.
know that I would love to share so many of the poems in this book with younger writers and readers, because I think the poems would give them courage and a power to speak in their own voices. So if it's all right with you, I would like to thank you for this evening, and I will read Lifeboat.
I
If
would
that's
love
okay.
that.
I love that poem. And if you would read, maybe Make Up Your Mind, or any of the other poems you'd like to close with. But I read this poem, wishing for protection for all people in all lands, and lifeboats to spirit them to safety, and also the lifeboat of poetry, which saves us in our own lives as writers and as readers, and in your case, as a beloved translator. Thank you for the beautiful gift you've given all of us. And thank you for being part of the Archipelago family and inviting me in to be a little tiny part tonight.
I'm delighted.
So wonderful to meet you. Lifeboat. If you say today you want to be alone, you want to float away, the sea will rush to your door with its crashing waves, not with a boat to keep you safe.
Read that beautifully. And she lived her life like that. She lived her life knowing that it will be the sea that will come to her with the rushing waves, and not with the boat. And the choices she made as a writer, as well as the choices she made as a woman, the choices she made as a daughter, as a mother, as a feminist, all of those choices were so driven by a kind of very clear-headed understanding of, the price you pay for passion, or for determination. So thank you for reading that poem. Maybe I will read Make Up Your Mind. I mean, the other poem is also quite lovely. It's a little, let me see.
May I just say, as you're looking for it, Nandana Dev Sen, you have given us a gift, a great gift. And I want to say congratulations to you. And you've given your mother a gift. And thank you for what you've done and for your generosity in this project.
Thank you for saying that. And I know, we were talking yesterday about how when you worked with your father on his last manuscript, what a sacred time it was, and a project it was for you. And I feel like that about this. I feel like it was such a kind of, auspicious opportunity to be able to do that. So thank you for saying that. I wish I could have given my mother a copy of this, but I'm glad that we are sharing it now in this way. Okay, let me find it. Beloved. Okay. These beloved faces. I can no longer bear to watch my loved ones wilt with age. With my eyes wide open, I can't bear to see these beloved faces melt like clouds as pond scum thickens around the pools of their eyes. The brows collapse like a dead bird's wings. The lips dry up in the dust like unripe fruit plucked by storms. How everything dries, how everything flies away in the wind like scraps of paper, how everything disappears. How the heart folds up its tent and steps into the road, readying itself to raise a hand and hail a car for hire, to raise that hand to say goodbye and go. The heart retreats and folds, as I now see. It takes all shining pots and pans from the rack and shatters them on cold stone with a deafening crash. How, in the heat of the sun, all sounds fade away, all traces vanish. These beloved faces, like clouds, change their form and float away. With my eyes wide open, I can't bear to see the burnt grass in the yard so close to me.
This has been such an this has been such an incredible reading from discussion from both of you, and I'll just extend a thank you on behalf of the Global Voices program and our co-sponsor, the Seminary Co-op, to both Nandana and Naomi for being here and just sharing this amazing work with all of us. I could listen to you talk for so much longer, and I'm sure everyone else feels the same. So just a reminder, you can purchase Nandana's work at the Seminary Co-op. And we look forward to having all of you join us again for our upcoming programming, which
Also,
you can
I'm sure you can get Naomi's new book as well.
Yes, yes, that just came out too. So yeah, you can find our upcoming events at ihouse.uchicago.edu. And thank you both for such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Naomi.
much.
I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nandana. It was the greatest privilege. Please, let's stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely. And
Thank
let's find that houseboat in Kerala when all of this is, when the pandemic is over.
I'm ready. I'll be there with you. Thank you so much. I'll be keeping this book close. Thank you for all the beauty you have shared with us.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
I guess I'm trying to